Good evening, everyone. It seems like we haven't seen each other in a long time. Let's see. Consideration of routine applications. At this time, I will call our clerk for our first item.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move PD 6 for the police department in the amount of $54,860.
Second.
I have a motion moved and seconded. Discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
I would call at this time to the chairman of our law committee, Mr. Raymer, for SC7.
The Law Committee considered this item and approved this item 2-0. The Budget Committee considered this item and approved this item 4-0. The approval in each case was for the funding of $15,000 in settlement of the case that's referenced, Kelsey versus the town of Greenwich.
So I have a motion moved and seconded. Moved by Mr. Raymer, seconded by Ms. Tarkington. All those in favor?
Aye.
So moved. Assessor's report. What I would ask, I would entertain a motion that we include in the assessor's report under item 3, under our item under new business, our new assessor search committee report, along with our reevaluation team report. And with that, I would call.
So move.
Second.
Moved and seconded, moved by Ms. Tarkington, seconded by Mr. Pellegrino. So with that, our assessor's report, are there any questions on that we have this evening? Good evening, Mr. Shipman. Nice to see you. If not, I would move into the reevaluation team report.
Should we, I move that we approve
I'm
the
sorry.
assessor's report?
Second.
Moved by Ms. Tarkington, seconded by Mr. Raymer. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
12 months.
Closer. Thank you very much. Okay, so now, reevaluation team report. Mr. Finger or Ms. Tarkington?
Yes, you have the report before you, and it was delivered on Friday. The revaluation team has continued to meet with Mr. Shipman, who was named interim assessor on effective February 1st upon the retirement of Mr. Gwartney. And he's continuing to work, obviously, on, he signed the grand list as of February 1st, and as of February 16th, 101 property owners had processed applications for appeals to the Board of Assessment Appeals. So I think that's fairly low number. In terms of our town assessor search, in addition to what we advised you last month, we've also advertised in the Westchester newspaper last Sunday, and in addition, we have posted the position on the online versions of the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. The position will be closed this Friday, and we've got a tentative date set for interviews on March 14th.
Thank you. Mr. Finger, anything to add to that?
No.
I first of all, I'd like to thank you for your extra service on being part of that.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Norton?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to know, what is the last day for appealing, for the assessment appeals applications? Was it today?
Yes.
So as of February 25th, the close of business today.
21st.
Yeah, February 21st. No further appeals can be filed, is that correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Mr. Shipman, that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
I just want to put the date on.
Thank you. Anything else under those 3 items? Then I would move into the controller's report. Mr. Minarski, good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, BET members. I'll concentrate a little bit on the personnel moves in the Finance Department because there are multiple moves. As previously reported last month, the internal audit position was filled with a current Finance Department employee, and she's been working in that capacity for the last couple of weeks. Secondly, the risk management position, We had 3 finalists forwarded to the Finance Department, and a team was assembled of Mr. Art Norton, Roland Geiger, and myself, and we conducted interviews this morning on the 3 finalists. We all individually scored and put our scores together, and we actually ranked the 3 finalists the same way. Numerically, we weren't the same, but they came out 1, 2, 3, and we offered the position to Mr. Ron Lally, and he has accepted. And I believe everybody here knows Mr. Lally. He's a special project coordinator working out of the First Selectman's office, and hopefully, I'm glad to see that he accepted the position, and he'll be moving over to the Finance Department. Historically, Ron Lally was internal auditor about 5 years ago in the Finance Department and was stolen away from us by the previous town administrator, not the current one, but the previous one. So hopefully Ron will be back with this. Procedurally, I don't know the next step with HR, but hopefully he'll be physically working in finance. Number 3 is the workers' compensation technician, and I noticed that the chairman put on under new business the appointment of the Hay Study Special Project Team. I want to speak to that issue now because one of the outcomes of the Hay Study was having the workers' compensation function work out of the HR department. So they'll be taking the lead on hiring the workers' compensation technician. Who previously, this position reported in the Finance Department, and before that in the HR department, and it's been moving back and forth over the last 15 years. The cutoffs were last Friday, so Finance and HR will be working together to hire a workers' compensation technician. And finally, there's 5 members here who probably don't know who Anthony Giovannone is. Anthony was worked for about 10 years, reporting directly to Roland Geiger. He left August 1st to go to the Board of Education. It was a promotion. He works directly for Ben Brannion, who I think you all know. We'll be advertising the financial analyst position this week, and hopefully in the next few weeks we'll have a full complement of employees back in the Finance Department. That's basically it as far as the personnel moves, and I'll answer any questions relative to that or anything else in the Controller's report.
Mr. Chairman, before,
Mr. Norton?
I don't have a question for the Controller, but under the internal audit report, I'd like to recognize the fact that of all the driver's license of town employees in the permitted to drive list that has been published, including 132 volunteer firemen, their license have been presented and submitted to the town. And one addition to that is that we will make certain through the process that any volunteer fireman who's driving one of the heavy trucks, especially the pumpers, that they have the appropriate licensing to be able to drive those vehicles.
Okay. Is any questions for our Controller? I'll entertain a motion that the Controller's report be accepted as presented. Moved by Mr. Norton, seconded by Ms. Tarkington. Moves us to...
Vote.
Oh, I'm sorry. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? 12-0. Now we have the Treasurer's report for the month. Peter, do you have anything you wanted to highlight on this?
Actually, the Controller's report, one of the accomplishments or initiatives that working with the BET that we started was the cash flow analysis. As been reported a number of years ago, we were in danger of running very low on cash under the old modified pay-as-you-go. And when we went to the bonding program where we don't have to pay for the projects up front and then hope that, wait for the money to come in year 3, 4, and 5. Now we borrow on cash flow basis. Having said that, looking at the Treasurer's report, you could see that we're in a pretty healthy position with over $200 million cash in the bank on a number of various funds. So we're doing well in all phases of the, from general fund all the way through with the odd funds, which we refer to as funds other than general.
Wow.
It's good news, I guess.
Yes, very good news. Okay. I'll entertain a motion that for the Treasurer's report to be accepted as presented. Moved by Mr. Norton, seconded by Mr. Finger, I thought I heard. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? So moved, 12-0. Next item on our agenda is our standing committee reports. Audit committee report. Everybody should have had one on the desk waiting for them. Do we have any questions? Mr. Norton has already covered the permitted to drive. We have 100, how many people are on the driving list?
1,555 employees included on that.
And all those licenses and everything were checked?
And all 1,555 licenses have been reviewed.
Wow. Are there any questions on the audit committee report?
I just want to clarify that so that it's clear. That's not all the town employees. That's only the town employees that either operate a town vehicle or are going to use their own personal vehicle for town use. For example, Roland and myself, Mr. Crary, we all submitted our licenses for checking. So it's not only using a town vehicle, but using your own vehicle if you're going to be working on town business.
That's the permitted to drive list. There's 1,555, which is the reason there's a difference between the statement, the figure in the controller's report and this figure, because the difference of the volunteers, especially the 132 volunteer members of the volunteer fire companies. So there's a difference, Mr. Chairman, between the permitted to drive list, which has 1,555 town employees, and the driver's license numbers that have been reviewed.
Okay, I understand. I'll make a comment on the audit committee report. I think there's a few issues on this one that we'll be hearing more about as we move forward. So I just want to make a highlight on that's probably a couple items on there will be revisited. BET liaison. We've already covered the revaluation team. Are there any other reports? POCD, item 8. Anything new on that? Ms. Tarkin, is that coming to an end, those subcommittees?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I believe that at least the downtown committee that I serve on is going to present its report, I believe on March 21st. I mean, not to I don't know, we don't know to whom yet, but it's going to be presented on March 21st.
Mr. Finger?
And the POCD Housing Task Force, which I served on, submitted its report at the end of January to the first selectman. So we're through with our task.
So implementation continues. Mr. Brady?
But it has not met, nor has it scheduled.
Okay. Town properties?
Town properties of which I serve, Mr. Chairman, has not scheduled a meeting.
Downtown, Ms. Tarkington gave her report. Housing, Mr. Finger. Transportation?
We have scheduled a meeting, and it will be held early in March.
Okay, so that's,
There's been some issue as to actually what other groups or what other participants will be at that presentation.
okay, good. Item 9, BET Special Project Team Reports. As we know, last month I created a special project team called the BET IT Upgrade. Mr. Bedrosian, and July is coming, so let me just give you my vision. July, we get handed our device. July, we start training, and then the paper goes away, and my bad back with carrying all the paper. So I look forward to an update. I'm all ears.
We met, you set up the committee. We did meet with, I guess we had suggested special attention to moving away from the delivery of paper using and shifting to electronic delivery of transmission of documents and use. Suggested first that we look at iPads as part of the solution, but it could be any kind of small computer. We met with Mr. Benarski, Ms. Brown, to review their work, and not unsurprisingly, it is characterized by a high degree of manual work on paper. Some of the statistics from it, there are 30 packages of the BET package prepared each month, delivered around. The dozen that go to us are delivered by courier, as are the budget committee packages, at $16 a pop. That's some $4,600 a year on courier services. In terms of recommendations, I believe it's just not been, Greg and I haven't gone through a detailed vetting of this, that we can move to an electronic delivery form. Ultimately, it would start with the departments themselves preparing the blue sheets probably on a web form, submitting them. Elaine would be working instead of with stacks of paper and copying machines, assembling the BET Budget Committee agenda and our agenda and the other committee's agenda electronically. Would continue to review the agenda with the committee chairman in advance of the meetings, but publication would be putting the completed package up on the website, as she does now. And with a notice, I've communicated with Boris about putting RSS feeds on our various committee pages so that we could be notified when something was posted. She would not have to send us an email or anything to say it is up. I ran some rough numbers on costs. The capital cost in setting it up, a dozen 32 gig iPads with the Verizon 3G cover and a basic software kit would run about $9,600 for the dozen of them. The operating costs, which are primarily the 3G telephone service, which can be turned on and off. If you're not using it, you can turn it off and stop the bill. But assuming it was being used 25% of the time, would be a little under $1,100 a year. We would save the courier services at $4,600. Looks like a 2 to 3 year payback on that alone. I think it would save, based on the discussions with Elaine, save her the better part of a day a month, maybe more. And there are other savings buried in there that I have not quantified. But it's I hesitate to use the word slam dunk or no-brainer, but those are the terms that come to mind. I think we would have substantial benefit from it, and it would certainly ease the load on your back.
I would like to reiterate that from our point of view, it's the emails are all centralized for any FOI issues. Appointments can be generated. They just, populate your fields this way. If the Cone room gets changed to the Gisborne room, times. The RTM has a really interesting system in the fact that they pick a date and the material for that meeting's date is there. I think we could get into some cargo system for storing of documents. I think somewhere along the line, you're going to probably have to visit with Mr. Fox and just kind of, there will be certain things that will have to stay paper. And
in a previous life, I did spend some time with Mr. Fox on these related issues with respect to the RTM. So these are by no means insoluble problems. The issue of long-term electronic being the principal storage as opposed to paper copies is probably a long way away for municipalities. Corporate, other ventures clearly have already gone that way. I think we're going to be tied to pen and ink for a while yet, and so people will be filing the final copies, the certified copies, et cetera, of the documents.
so it's February and July. I'm just anticipating, and Mr. Mynarski, anything to do with this, you have the resources to be able to accomplish this within the finance budget?
We're talking about under $10,000 capital expenditure to get it started.
As I talked about before, we currently have 3 vacancies, and we have excess salary funds, and I could easily absorb $10,000. Going forward, I don't know, did you say $1,100 operating?
It depends on how much they're turned on, how much they're turned off.
I'll discuss with the BET Budget Committee Chairman and Roland about tweaking the budget going forward as far as absorbing the $1,100.
Yes, the Budget Committee Chair
but
will
the
be
capital
very
portion-
supportive of this. He'll be very supportive.
For this year, we're okay with the capital cost.
Okay. No, I thank you, and I know you've put a fair amount of work into this, and I think it's a valuable project for us.
There is more to do. We've had some discussions with Boris, there will be more, and as to how to really integrate this into the, and have the appropriate IT support, either
And we
from
should-
him or elsewhere.
Thank you very, very much. Old business, Nathaniel Witherell Building Committee, request for release of conditions. At this time, I would call on Mr. Pellegrino. This was reviewed by our vice chairman with outside counsel, Mr. Norton, and the Budget Committee took this up, and I would, at this time, look for your report and suggestions.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The first thing I want to do is put this on the table formally, so I move to release the condition requiring the Project Renew, be managed by a construction manager as agent instead of a construction manager at risk.
Second.
I have a motion that's moved by Mr. Pellegrino, second by Mr. Norton. Discussion, and I could ask you for your committee report first, and then general discussion.
Thank you. On November 21st, 2011, the BET approved $20,205,000 for the construction of Nathaniel Witherell Project Renew. The approval included 5 subject to release conditions. One of the conditions required the project be managed by a construction manager as agent instead of a construction manager at risk. After the BET placed this condition on the project, the building committee, Nathaniel Witherell Building Committee, began the process of examining the feasibility, implications, and process of complying with it. That process led to a compromise proposition. That proposition, as I'm going to refer to it in a letter from the building committee to the budget committee, is referred to as the cost-plus hybrid solution. This proposition was, 1, it would keep the existing contract in place, and 2, the town would not execute an addendum to the contract whereby the construction manager would guarantee a maximum price for the project, otherwise known as the GMP. As I earlier stated, a letter dated February 6th to the Budget Committee detailed the thinking of the Budget Committee, its rationale, and the solution it proposed. In short, the letter outlines how the construction manager would still hold all the subcontractor contracts and be responsible for ensuring the work is completed in a safe and expeditious manner, and that by not signing the GMP, the addendum, the construction manager's interests are aligned with the building committee, the town, and Nathaniel Witherell. This new approach in the letter was reviewed by town council, who brought into discussion additional counsel, I believe, from the outside. Upon review, quote, town council is in agreement with the building committee's analysis and recommendation, end of quote. Our committee took up this item. I think we had a very full discussion. Our committee voted 3 in favor, 1 opposed, of releasing the condition pursuant to the building committee's compromise solution. Ms. Tarkington was the lone dissent. It's my understanding that she holds the opinion, 1, that the Nathaniel Witherell Building Committee could have gone down the road of construction manager as agent, but didn't. 2, that an owner's rep is still an option. And 3, the compromise solution doesn't go far enough to align the construction manager's interests with the town's. The last comment I want to just make is this is a item that came before the Budget Committee that had input from 3 members, Mr. Brady, Mr. Johnson, and Mr. Norton. I actually want to thank all 3 of them for taking the time to write your thoughts, submit them, and hold discussions, certainly with me, in terms of your position so I could understand them better. And in the course of our discussions, I believe Mr. Brady certainly and Mr. Norton were brought in to our discussion at the Budget Committee, and I think it helped and was a more productive meeting. So that is my report on this item.
Thank you. Before I go into general discussion, I would like to, Mr. Fox, if I may. Mr. Fox, we had a phone call, and I can't remember the gentleman's name. We had a conference call, Mr. Norton, yourself.
Robert O'Brien.
Mr. O'Brien, I'm sorry. We had a conversation, and as I understand this, the town, we wanted one type of contract, and if we had switched and held to our condition, that could have caused a rebid process,
That's potential.
potential exposure,
Yes, sir.
because we were notified that other companies that might have wanted that kind of
Yes, sir.
arrangement? Okay. And your recommendation to the board is I'm going to use your term if I may, the hybrid model?
Yes, sir. I will say to you, and we've had this conversation many times, I am sensitive to the role I play. I'm sensitive to the fact that I do not set policy. That is your job. But when you take all of the factors into consideration, including the one you have just mentioned, when you take all of the factors that have been brought to your attention through the building committee, and in my mind, and I think it's also fair to say in the mind of Mr. O'Brien's, when you take a look in particular at items 5 and 6 of their rationale on pages 3 and 4 of their letter, when you take all of those factors into account in this fact pattern, with this contractor, with this construction project, it is our recommendation that this would work the best, taking into account the concerns and the desires of your board when it set out those conditions back in November. So that's a long way of saying yes.
Okay.
There you go.
Thank you. Mr. Pellegrino?
Yeah, I just want to comment. The two paragraphs that you pointed out, Wayne, one is what I did incorporate in my delivery.
Yes, sir.
That being specifically that the construction manager will hold all the subcontractor contracts and is responsible for ensuring the work is completed in a safe and expeditious manner. The second point, which I did not highlight, but it bears being publicly stated, is that Nathaniel Witherall as a skilled nursing facility is a unique facility in and of itself, and there is a feeling that this was absolutely the appropriate way to go because of the 24-hour, 7-day-a-week need to keep that facility up and operating with the people that are there.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Raymer?
I have a question that really is probably best addressed to Mr. Andy Fox, if I may do that. We have lots of Foxes in the room today.
No relation.
Mr. Fox, there's a piece of it that I wasn't sure that I had properly and fully understood at the Budget Committee. Let me just ask it again. So we go through a bidding process. You have a series of bids that come back. The town collaborates with Turner Construction in reviewing those bids. We approve certain bids, and based upon our approval of the bids, Turner, the general contractor, enters into contracts with each of those subs.
Correct.
Then, at some point during the course of the construction, in my hypothetical, one of the subs is performing poorly and with delay, and the job is beginning to lag, and then, frankly, that sub collapses completely, and now there's an awkward moment at which bids have to be solicited from a replacement sub, who, because of now the time exigency, perhaps is quoting a somewhat higher price than the original sub had contracted for. The contract between Turner and the original sub is just that. It's a contract between Turner and the original sub. Whose risk is it that we now are entering into a contract with a replacement sub at somewhat more money?
Because all these subcontractors are bonded, that risk is borne by the bond cost.
Outside of the bonding issue, who is between the town and the contractor is incurring the cost and then looking to the bonding company for reimbursement? Turner. So to that extent, Turner is still at risk, except that Turner is going to be indemnified under most hypotheticals by the bonding company. Is that the point? And because of that bond, your view of it has been, perhaps our town attorney's view of it has been, that our contractor is not truly at risk, and therefore he remains on our side of the table, and that's because of the protection of the bond in each case.
Bond, and he hasn't executed the guaranteed maximum price where he is held responsible for the total project cost.
That I understand. Then if I can pick for a moment on the other Mr. Fox for just a second, Attorney Fox for a second. You reviewed the original contract in a setting in which it was your anticipation that there was going to be the guaranteed maximum price, and at that point you found that contract to be in legal order. And are you still satisfied that that contract is in legal order without the GMP, without the guaranteed maximum price? You're still satisfied that that's a sound, viable, appropriate contract for this work?
Yes, sir.
Thank you both.
Mr. Johnson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Pellegrino made reference to some comments that I had shared. And I want to just provide a little more perspective on that, if you will. Since learning of the withdrawal CM discussion several months ago, as I sat in on some of the meetings before I joined this body of the BET, and since then I've been in favor of the more of the model of the CM at risk contract. And for some of the usual benefits that go along with an at-risk contract, and then some of them we've already talked about, but certainly it would give us the opportunity to know the total costs once a GMP is reached with a CM at risk, which I felt would help us with our budgeting of the resources that are not quite as heavy as we think sometimes with the capital process. And again, the CM would be responsible for processing all the different invoices, contracts, some of the insurance requirements. Of course, a lot of this is open book in that CM at risk process, but I also saw that there was a big incentive to the CM, in this case Turner, under that type of contract of finishing the project on time and on budget. It's really their dollar. They've guaranteed a price. Anyway, having said all that, and in the best interest of getting consensus among us as a group, I fully support the CM hybrid, if you will, of cost-plus basis. And I really look forward to the project coming in on time, on schedule, certainly under budget or on budget. And I think it'll be a great experience for us to kind of see how that model works and maybe apply it to some other future models down the road. So I'm all in favor of the cost-plus contract process.
Ms. Tarkington, followed by Mr. Norton.
Yes, well, I certainly am, looking forward to the contract coming in on time and on budget. But, I will continue to, I value the work by Mr. Fox and his colleagues and my own colleagues on the board. But the BET approved the Nathaniel Witherall Project Renew 3 months ago with the 6 conditions to mitigate the risk of the project. And I know that Mr. Pellegrino has mentioned several of the reasons why I didn't support this. I think that the BET has discussed a policy to have the construction manager or an owner's representative on the same side of the table. The hybrid gets us partially there. But the original budget, when we approved the soft costs, certainly did have a construction manager or owner's rep in charge of the contract. It's true that Witherall is a 24-hour facility, and that speaks for itself, and we always knew that in the discussions. While a hospital such as Greenwich Hospital does use a construction manager guaranteed maximum price contract, they, at the same time, if we just say use the Helmsley Pavilion project, they also had full-time owners' representatives on that project during the construction operating hours. Again, I won't continue to talk about these points. But I also feel that we have an obligation to the RTM. In December, the BET made representations to the RTM that the conditions were imposed on a pass-or-fail basis. Now, 60 days later, the building committee is requesting that a condition be modified. And in my perspective on this, which I don't think Mr. Pellegrino mentioned in his comments, but I think is probably one of the most critically important points, at least to me, is at a minimum the BET should require that the building committee receive RTM approval for the change prior to it becoming effective. So I would urge this BET to ask the building committee in its approval process to request that RTM approval for this change. We were very clear in our discussions with the RTM that the conditions were pass-fail. So again, for these reasons and without additional review by the RTM, although I'm willing to discuss this, as we continue our discussions here, I won't support the requested change. Thank you.
Mr. Norton?
Mr. Chairman, first off, I'm the representative from this board on the Nathaniel Witherell Building Committee, and I've only served in that capacity for the last 55-plus days. Initially, my opinion was the contract between Nathaniel Witherell or the Town of Greenwich and Turner Construction Company should be that as construction manager, as agent for the town. However, I think that type of contract in this particular facility, in this particular situation, puts us at greater risks than what we would anticipate and what we have experienced with other building committees. The unique qualities of a healthcare facility, which Nathaniel Witherell is, I think demand a contractual approach which represents the exigencies as well as the conditions that exist. Nathaniel Witherell is a facility that's a healthcare facility. It's a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week operation in which at any one time we could have as many as 200 patients within the facility. The construction projects and the construction process is one that's basically a 5-day-a-week operation from roughly the hours of 7 in the morning to 4 to 4:30 in the afternoon, and we have a great deal of downtime. We need, I believe, a construction manager which is able to serve the needs of both the building committee and the town and the facility in addition to those periods of time. And that is why, and the principal reason why I have changed my opinion and support completely the recommendation that has been made by the building committee, what is identified as a hybrid model. And I strongly support that and do recommend that all other members of the board support the change that is being requested.
So let me address Ms. Tarkington's point of view. Going back to the RTM approves the appropriation predicated on the discussions that the project needed to pass a certain series of conditions from the BET. What I see our actions, if we choose to go the route of the hybrid, is we are satisfying one of our conditions, and therefore I would not see that needing additional RTM approval. But Mr. Fox is here, and I'm sure if I quoted something inaccurate, he would be more than happy to flag that. With that said, let me see if I can put perspective on this. Our prior chairman was the member on the Hamilton Avenue School Building Committee that Mr. Johnson now sits on, and went through some lengthy process, which, by the way, is not over yet, on that particular project, and worked very diligent to get us to have a policy in place for this type of management that we put in the contract. Our Policy and Procedure Committee needs to really formalize something going forward, because in this particular case, what I see has happened is the Nathaniel Witherell Building Committee entered into an agreement. Our condition came after that. Am I accurate on that, Mr. Fox?
3 years ago almost.
Correct. Now, with that said, had there been a BET policy that was very clear that what we were looking for, I'm sure the building committee would have followed that. So from a lessons learned point of view, we probably do need a policy on this, or at least some kind of guidance, at least that the finance department can say, hey, look, here's what the BET is normally looking for. In the case that we've done this at the Glenville School project, that project went very well, on time, on budget. I think we met everything we wanted to do there. And I know there are differences. In my opinion, it would be very hard for me to vote in any other different manner than the recommendation of the town attorney on this particular case, and I will vote that way. But that's where I see us on this. I think there's a condition that has been addressed. I can't say it was our original intentions, and I want to emphasize the work that went into that condition. I mean, this board had agonized for quite some time over some of the other construction projects that we didn't have this type of control measure that we wanted. And I respect Ms. Tarkington's opinion, and I see it that way, but it would be very difficult for me to vote in a different manner than what the town attorney is recommending. Anyone else? Okay, so then we have a motion on the floor to, and I will ask Mr. Pellegrino just to reread that resolution one more time real quick, so we're all clear.
The motion on the floor is to release the condition requiring Project Renew be managed by a construction manager as agent instead of construction manager at risk.
And that's on behalf of the Budget Committee, so it does not need a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So I'm going to 11-1-0, Ms. Tarkington in the negative. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for your hard work on that one.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay. Moving on. New business. We've already done the new assessor search committee report, and we now have the approval of the July 1, 2011 retirement system, Town of Greenwich actuarial review and analysis. And for that, I will call again on Mr. Pellegrino, representing the Budget Committee, for the report on this item.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, again, I'm going to move the following resolution. I believe each member has this in front of them, but for the record, this is a resolution for acceptance of recommended actuarial assumptions. Resolved that the Board of Estimate and Taxation accepts the recommendation of the Retirement Board to change the assumed investment return assumption from 8% to 7.75%, and to change the assumed inflation rate assumption from 3.5% to 3.25%, effective July 1st, 2011, for the fiscal year 2012-2013. Further resolved that the BET acknowledges the recommendation of the Retirement Board to phase in the aforementioned actuarial assumptions over a 4-year period. However, chooses to reserve its right to accept or reject such changes subject to periodic reviews on an annual basis. That is the resolution. That what precedes the resolution is the following. The Retirement Board met on January 26, 2012 with the town's actuary, EFI actuaries, to review the existing retirement system actuarial assumptions. The Retirement Board, on a vote of 5-0, voted to accept the following actuarial assumptions and is forwarding its recommendations to the full BET for their approval. The recommendations were to take down, reduce the assumed investment return from 8%, which is what it is currently, to 7% over 4 years, and that being 7.75, 7.5, 7.25, 7. And to change the assumed inflation rate, which is currently the 3.5%, and bring that down to 3%, but that would be done from 3.5 to 3.25 to 3 over a 3-year period of time. That is the motion that I put before us.
So
The resolution.
that resolution, did that come from the Budget Committee, or is that, you had a discussion on it, so that would have to be seconded then, if you didn't have that?
I second
it.
Seconded by Mr. Raymer. Discussion.
Okay. Mr. Chairman.
Yes?
The Retirement Board recommended we change the assumptions underlying the calculation of plan liabilities. Specifically, the rate of return we expect the plan to earn on average and the rate of inflation we expect to experience. I've already spelled out the changes that they've recommended. The effective change by accepting this resolution for this year is to move the town's contribution to the plan from $15.6 million to $16.4 million. That's an $800,000 increase. And that's for the fiscal year 12-13 budget. In terms of background, what this does is it brings the assumptions that underlie the retirement plan more in line with the reality of the investment markets that we have been experiencing for a considerable period of time now. It will increase the funding, the assets in the plan, by providing more assets for future years. In terms of the expectations now, if we were to continue down this path, our contributions for successive years would go from $16.4 million to $19.4 million to $21.8 million, and then cap out at $22.7 million. So the implication of the changes that the retirement board sees in future years would lead to that level of future contributions from the town to the plan. And by way of perspective, this past year, I believe the total disbursements from this plan were $22.9 million. And so what you see is over time, we're essentially getting to a contribution level about equal to what is actually being dispersed from the plan. My personal opinion, if I may say it at this time, is I think this change I strongly recommend. I think this board should embrace it. I think the retirement board is drawing upon their investment experience. They're drawing upon the knowledge of what other municipalities are doing and where they're at. And the proposal they have before us, if you can use the word, makes it a healthier plan. I think that would be a fair description. I think that's a benefit for all the members of the plan, the retirees as well as the current employees who are participants in this plan, to know that the town is behind it in its strongest form and fashion. And I think it also allows for prudent budgeting for the years ahead, because we know clearly from the actuarial report how much our future contributions are going to be going into this plan. So at that point, I think I'll step back and allow my other colleagues, if they have any other comments, to make.
Thank you very much. Ms. Tarkington?
Yes, I strongly support this. I believe if you look at last year's budget for this year, the amount we'll be putting into next year's fiscal budget is it's closer to the number that we had projected. In addition, this is headed in the right trend. As an example, New York City is moving down to 7% in this fiscal year. So it's an example of a municipality that's headed in this direction, is moving a bit more rapidly than us. I fully support this.
Anybody else? In my travels over the last month on this particular item, I want to thank Mr. Pellegrino, Mr. Minarski, Mr. Geiger, Mr. Simon on the retirement board. We've had a series of meetings. I'm, from a personal point of view, trying to get up to speed. When I look at this, and I remember the first time we had the actuarial report in the budget committee that was on the wall, if you remember, I think that was 2 budgets ago, Mr. Finger, remember? And we saw these numbers, and you could hear a pin drop on the carpet. We saw this trend going, and we knew that the liability from the mortality tables, people living longer, et cetera, salaries going up. There has been change, though, since that time. And I want to make sure we as a finance board are on top of every angle that could possibly have. We have less people going in to the pension plan now. The teachers are exempt. They're in the state teacher plan. We now are down to just public safety, police and fire going into the pension. So there is a change. If you go back to the 50s, everybody that got hired was in a pension plan and retired, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s. Now we're not having the enrollment in the pension plan. So there is a point in time out there where there's a change. There's just going to be a change. It's not now, but I want to make sure from our point of view that we recognize this, because as we continue to move forward with labor contract discussions, not putting people into the pension plan, looking at our charter implications, I just want to make sure that we as a finance board are, keeping an eye on the there will be a trend change is what I think will happen. So that is my take on it. And we even had a sit down on this is 4 o'clock today just to kind of go over this and discuss it. So I really appreciate all your time. And Mr. Minarski?
Just one real quick comment. The word change is continually used. I'd just like to point out to the newer members, this is a continuation of a change. 2 Januaries ago, the number was 8.5%, and the BET voted to move it from 8.5 to 8.25 to 8. So this is actually not the start of a change, it's a continuation of bringing it down to a more realistic assumption for return on the investments.
No, thank you, and I appreciate that. As I said, I would love to have that slide that was on the wall that gave us the projection going forward to see how close we were back then.
I'm sorry, question, what was the dollar amount 2 years ago? I mean, has that been changing the same level?
I'm going to point that out tomorrow morning. You want to know what
I was curious.
The ARC annual required contribution is? It's in one of my slides tomorrow morning. We started out at 0, and we went to about 600,000 about 6-7 years ago. But it's, I believe it was 14 and change. What's it? 14 and change this year was 10 million and change.
10.6.
I'm going to address that tomorrow morning in specifics as far as the history of the ARC, both in the pension plan and the OPEB
Thank you.
presentation.
Thank you again. With that, we have a motion that's been moved and seconded. Any other discussion? All those in favor, signify by saying by aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 12-0.
Okay.
Thank you. Let me just write that down for my records. Next item on the agenda, appointment of a Hay Study Special Project Team. The Town of Greenwich, in its continuing efforts to deliver a better product to our customers internally and externally, find efficiencies, deal with the economic times of today, went out and did a study called the Hay Study on the possibilities of finding efficiencies and a better product within the HR departments, town, and Board of Ed. They're two separate departments. To that time, we've looked at, from the time that the BET approved the draft report for a framework of a potential merger in the future, we've had many, and I'll credit Mr. Pellegrino on this and Mr. Finger and some of our other members. We've had many meetings and conversations with the Office of the First Selectman, the Board of Ed. I'll use the word enlightened. We've had discussions about our software programs that we use. That goes into some of the stuff you've heard about with retirement. And I think we're at a point in time where I think the next step is we need to take a look at this. And what I'm going to ask is that Mr. Pellegrino chair a committee with Ms. Kiernan to look into this and move this forward. I would like to see something, let's say, by June 30th. And what I'd like to see the committee do is work with the Office of the First Selectman, Board of Education. It's going to take some efforts, and I think we heard it in the Board of Ed's budget presentation that, you know, they're all ears. What can we do to make a better product? You've certainly heard it in the Office of the First Selectman. And I would ask if you would chair that, and the two of you. I would normally say this would be the HR committee, but I think there's a lot of the different ground that's working here. I think you have budget issues. I think you have appointing authority issues. I think there's a lot of stuff going on there. And I would ask if we could proceed with that. I think that's the best road to move on with this, whether we need a new software pack. I'm not sure what the recommendations are that you'll come up with, but I think everybody should be on board.
If I may.
Mr. Pellegrino?
First, I want to thank you for, I guess, the assignment.
I'll
let you know at the end of it. But I look forward to working with you, Mary Lee, and Chairman Moriarty, because you're in our audience tonight. I look forward to working with you and whomever you appoint to work with us. And we'll have some fun going forward.
So hopefully we'll get their report on our iPads. Sorry. Got to have we got to smile once in a while. So, but I really do appreciate that. And again, for the rest of our members, if you have any questions or comments, I'll just say forward those. And again, I've talked with the First Selectman. I know we've had conversations, town administrator, superintendent of schools. So I look forward to seeing what we can continue on with this. Okay. Approval of BET minutes for January 23rd. I have just a quick question. Mr. Huffman, were you at that meeting?
Yes.
With that said, I'll take the time to say, I know we missed you at one of our meetings.
It was, I think, one of the,
Okay, one of our special meetings. I'm sorry, I just had that question. So you've used up your sick time for the term, so you can talk to HR right here and but I'm glad to see you back. Welcome, and I hope things are going well.
I thank all of you for your support, and I'm glad to be back and functioning a little more every day.
No, our sincere, emails were flying. How's he doing? What's going on? So I will entertain a motion from you that the minutes from our January 23rd meeting be accepted. Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Aye. All right. Thank you. Chairman's report. Obviously, it's been a very busy month. I never would have thought, and if Mr. Walker was here, boy, would I have something to say to him.
No, he's what?
With that said, over the past month, I've had some meetings with the Bruce Museum. One of those, I was accompanied by Mr. Finger, and I thank him. We met with Peter Sutton and discussing the museum operations and the impact of the economic times there. They'll have a capital request that you may get tomorrow. That didn't quite make the CIP. Discussing their future plans, their future museum expansion. Quite an interesting operation there. We have a tour of the facility that I thought was quite amazing. They are really full. It's quite a. There's the Walter. What was that exhibit? Walter Wick exhibit for everybody in town. That is amazing. We kind of got stuck looking at the pictures, but that was a very interesting meeting and working with them. One of the things that I think are interesting there is that we want them to be part of the capital talks of the town and where things are going. Mr. Finger and I also had a brief meeting with the Chief of Police, Jim Heavey, our new chief, discussing the new GASB requirements for relating to comp time and disclosing liabilities in our CAFR. I plan on continuing the discussions. I think it was safe to say that they understand our situation and they're working on a plan, and I think we'll have a series of meetings on that. I think when we get to tomorrow and fixed charges, this will probably come up maybe with a suggestion or two for some budget line item changes for this year. But I plan on, continuing those discussions there. With that, it's been a busy meeting. We've attended all the budget deliberations. We have 2 meetings this week, and then we're getting ready to get towards Consolidation Day, which is, I think, next week, and working towards Decision Day. Other than that, it's been extremely busy. Lots of emails, lots of communication, and with that, I would call on Mr. Norton. Do you have anything?
Other than the fact that St. Thomas is very good, no.
Mr. Huffman, you may have used up your sick time, but Mr. Norton has exceeded his vacation time. Ms. Kiernan, do you have anything? Nothing. With that, so Mr. Brady, I'm looking for a motion for adjournment over there.
I move that we adjourn.
Second of Mr. Goldrick. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.